I know you've got an ear out for the start of the podcast, but before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to remind you to keep an eye out for Darrell Lee's limited edition Christmas treats, because they're in stores now. Like the iconic Christmas nougat pudding, so yummy and a gorgeous little gift. And some delicious Chrissy-themed twists on your favourite treats, like the Darrell Lee Rockley Road with chewy red and green jelly pieces, green and red crunchy milk chocolate balls, my favourites, and green apple and strawberry flavoured licorice. Watch them disappear. Your Christmas treats table will pop with colour and scrumptiousness. Spread some joy, bring the fun, and enjoy the Christmas tradition that is Darrell Lee. Hurry before they sell out. Darrell Lee makes Christmas better.
Looking for a new career? Welcome to Do HVAC Training Service Center in North Charleston. Enroll today in our comprehensive HVAC training hands-on field experience-based program, covering troubleshooting, maintenance, installation, and more on various HVAC systems and ductwork. We offer EPA and NAEP preparation and testing, along with various certifications. Enjoy payment options. Achieve certification in under 5 months. Enroll now for your new journey of skill development and career advancement. Log on to dewhvactrainingsc.com to inquire.
This is The 5 of My Life with me, Nigel Marsh. The series where I talk to notable people about 5 of their defining things. The way it works is my guests always choose a favourite film, book, song, place and possession. They tell me their choices in advance so I can research them, but they don't tell me why they've chosen them. That's the subject of our conversation. The reason I devised this series is I wanted to create a slightly different way to gain an insight into the real lives and thoughts of prominent people. Richard Glover is a best-selling author of 13 books, journalist for the Sydney Morning Herald and Washington Post, and presenter of one of Australia's most loved radio shows, The Drive programme on 702 ABC Sydney. Your film, I am really thrilled that you chose it, because I had never heard of it before. So in your honour, I watched it.
All right.
And
it's weird, isn't
holy moly.
It's weird.
That's good to Kate. This is sensational. It's a 20-year-old sleeping with an 80-year-old.
Yeah.
The music's by Cat Stevens.
Yeah.
I mean, why have I not heard of this film?
Yeah.
So would you mind telling me your story behind Harold and Maude?
Well, I remember seeing it about 6 times over. So, and I don't know why, really, because looking at it now, it's just weird. It's really
very radical
weird.
for 71.
And then when I met my life partner, when I was about 21, it turned out she'd seen it like 10 times. So the reason I nominate it as one of my 5 is not because I think it's the greatest film ever, not because I particularly encouraging people to watch it now. In fact, I don't quite know what I would think if I watched it now. Just that I think it showed the hunger of the times for something different. So I grew up, in Sydney and in Canberra. I go to this private school in Canberra as an adolescent, and not that it was particularly bad or anything like that, but masculinity at the time in the 70s felt like a straitjacket rather than a smorgasbord. It involved attitudes to women I didn't have, attitudes to sport I certainly didn't have, attitudes to alcohol that I've spent the years since working on. It just seemed a very constrained life, I suppose, and quite opposite to, life is not perfect at all now, but I do think our young men in particular just have a wider choice of how to be themselves than we did. And I think that's what drove you to, you went to the cinema and you saw this deeply odd film, which was about a young man who kept on staging these sort of mock suicides in front of his rich mother, and then had this relationship with this very sort of geriatric woman who turned out, well, I won't give away the ending, but, it's
What a great performance by her.
Yeah, Ruth Gordon.
Yeah.
Great actor. And
So I was watching that. And
what did you make of it now?
So very weird. And thinking, if I was watching this in 1971, I'm watching it in 2018 thinking this is sort of ahead of its time. And you go, hold on, it was done 40 years ago. But what I actually thought, and this is not a line, this is true, is I just finished your book, The Land Before Avocados, talking about how Australia was. So it's really interesting to hear your explanation of why it might have resonated with you.
Yeah, the hunger for something that was not constrained.
Or can I use up in sort of blancmange, a bit, sort of vanilla? You go, and then
it was incredibly bland monoculture. I mean, the book is I think it's quite patriotic in a way, because I don't think there's any country which has gone from there in 1961 or something to here, has travelled such a distance in such a short period of time, from the most bland monoculture, ethnically homogenous, economically protected, really difficult for anyone who is different in any way. The list goes on. But very few places have gone from such an extreme example of that to such a really great, and we are not a perfect society, but to such a place, 43% of the people in Sydney speak a language other than English at home. 40%. 40% were born somewhere else other than Australia. So, and that's one measure, but there's a million other measures of the fact that while it's not a perfect society, it's a very different society to the one of my childhood.
Sure. Do you know, reading it's The Lamb Before Avocado is the correct title, isn't it?
The Lamb Before Avocado.
It is one of the stories that really resonated. And I think this is in like the first chapter, because it happened to my mum. And we laugh about it at the kitchen table. And it's interesting hearing you write about millennials thinking you're making it up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You go, no, my mother, Margaret, who is alive and will listen to this, got married to John, my dad, and was therefore fired.
Yeah.
When she got engaged. When she announced her engagement. Congratulations, Margaret. Here's a tea party and you're fired. No one bats an eyelid. And life continues.
That's right. Well, the book is full of, the book plays the game of let's shock a millennial quite a lot, really, which is all these things where if you tell any young person, they'll just say, no, that cannot be true.
It can't be true.
So there's a million examples in the book. The one you cite is the marriage bar. So until 1966, in any Commonwealth government job, you get sacked the instant you get married because they don't want to take you away from your housewifely
It's like a Monty Python sketch, but it's true.
So the public service is full of women who are hiding their wedding rings or hiding their married name or hiding a pregnant belly under a billowy blouse in order to try to eke out another few weeks of employment and thus pay before the inevitable happens.
And talking about pay, the bank. I said to Kate, it should be reinstated, where if she went to the bank and said, I want a loan, or we go,
husband's permission.
Could you get your husband?
There are some things from the past that should be brought back, certainly. No, women couldn't really have credit. Single women had credit cards. Obviously, credit cards come in. Bank card comes in the late 70s. Before then, there are store cards. So you might have a David Jones card or something like that. But then once you get married, you have to give it up.
Amazing.
And get another one with your husband's permission. Until 1984, this is a good one to shock a millennial. Until 1984, married women need their husband's written permission before leaving the country. Until 1984.
It's amazing.
Because you need to get your husband's signature before you get a passport.
But you are right. I've got twin daughters who are 18, and they think, Dad, you're making it up. That just cannot
be true.
Or it's from the 17th century. Not it's from...
I think there are some things in the book where when I tell older people, they say, of course, Richard, don't be a moron. Everyone knows that. It's not even worth putting in the book. At the same time, the same fact, a younger person will say, that cannot be true. You're lying. Yeah. So, for instance, in the pages of the Australian Woman's Weekly and everywhere else, right through the early 70s.
They're not Ford pills.
Well, there are. I'll tell you about.
Are you fat?
I'll tell you about Ford pills. But yeah, I was just saying about the married names, actually, that no married woman is called by her first name really ever. So even someone famous, you couldn't work out what their first name was. Even someone famous like Sonia McMahon, wife of the Prime Minister, great socialite at the time, is always described as Mrs. William McMahon. And she's photographed with Mrs. Bill Carruthers and Mrs. Bert Smith. It's a very gender-fluid country, I can tell you. All the women have got men's names. And again, I say that to people my age and they say, well, mate, everyone knows that. In fact, my mother still gets letters from certain people addressed to Mrs. Phil Smith.
Mrs. Nigel Marsh. I opened one of my wife's letters because I thought they made a mistake. They put an S on the Mr.
Yeah.
Because why? I mean, there isn't a Mrs. Nigel Marsh. But apparently there is. I'm married to her.
Apparently there is. So that surprises people. You mentioned Ford pills. Yeah, there's lots of... It's funny because... it's a travel book really about this period, about the 60s and 70s. So I try to dive in and swim around in the period. You can do that really effectively with something like the Woman's Weekly. And there's some surprises along the way. The articles are really quite intellectual, actually. There's a great article about this rising British politician called Margaret Thatcher. What will happen to her?
Yes,
There's a really good piece on a young actress called Jackie Weaver and all that. And so the articles are pretty good, actually, but there's this sadness that seeps from the advertising.
Yeah.
And the advertising is for the divorce agency, which, of course, you need the private investigator to get divorced because you need to prove divorce. The constant diet pills.
Body shaming was next level.
Bex and Vincent tablets, so that people are drugging themselves constantly. Yeah, the Ford pill ad is fun.
So to make yourself, 4 pills will make you as attractive as the women your husband stares at in the street.
Yeah, and then the body copy says, have you looked at your husband lately? Not as your husband, but as a man. Have you looked at yourself? Not as his wife, but as his secretary. Don't be afraid of what you see. Start fighting. Take some Ford pills today. You know what they are, don't you?
They're laxatives.
They're laxatives.
Unbelievable.
So you may well get your husband's back, but make sure you're close to a toilet when you do.
Well, listen, so I'm going to, talking of books, I'm going to move you on to Bill Bryson's Notes from a Small Country, which so I hadn't seen Harold and Maude, but I had read that book and I loved it. And the thing that I remember from that book that just sticks in my mind is his wonderful description of the finger wave. If you're in England and you're driving and you pass someone, and other cultures wouldn't even notice it, but they just lift.
Oh no,
finger.
we do that.
I love
we do that. We do that in the outside the cities.
Yeah,
that's that little truck drivers. Yeah, but look, I think I came across him really early when he first started writing. I remember reading the first piece he had in Granta,
right?
The literary magazine, and it was a chapter from what turned out to be his first book, which hadn't come out by then. And I still got a memory of, I know exactly where I was. I was sitting in this bedroom, and I can picture the bedroom, and I was reading the Granta, and I thought, my God, this is so funny. It was the one about him growing up in Des Moines, Iowa.
Oh, the 50s, brilliant.
The first line is, I was born in Des Moines, Iowa. Someone has to be, I think, look, they're all great. I think what he really teaches anyone who's interested in comedy writing is that, first of all, you can be nice and you can be naughty. You can do both. You don't have to choose an entirely dark palette or an entirely bright palette. So obviously there's people like David Sedaris where the palette is quite dark, and there's other people where I talk a bit in this book about Ross Campbell, who was a great columnist in the 60s in Australia. The palette is very light. You can do both. So I love the way Bryson, in Notes from a Small Country, he's in love with England. So he's an American who's living in England for the first time. He's kind of touring around. He loves the place. In fact, he ends up living there. He loves it so much. But there's also just these really great moments where he's so naughty. So one example almost at random, he's travelling in a train and there's one of those great train bores next to him, which Britain produces better than anybody else in the world. And this guy's talking about the wheels being, from this particular decade, and they were obviously produced in Sheffield, and you can tell from the way the seats are that the leather was this brand and that produced there. And Bryson saying, I just wanted this guy to stop, and I think I'm here to Cardiff. Oh God, what's going to happen? And then the mood in the piece changes because he says the guy then admits that his wife only died a year before, and the whole tone of the piece shifts, and then Bryson says, "Suicide, I presume." It's so naughty. And so, a lot of comedy writing, I think, is playing with the reader's expectations. So a lot of it is like a little fishing expedition. You draw somebody in, you point their attention in one direction, and then, you shift tone. And he's recently gone back to England for a new book, and he's gone round again. And there's this very similar passage in a way where he's on a walking path, and there's this rather posh local who's got a dog who does a poo on the walking path. And Bryson says, and she doesn't pick it up, and he says, "Well, come on, you've got." And so she, in a very sort of aristocratic way, she sort of pushes a few leaves over it. Bryson says, thus turning it into a landmine. And then the next paragraph of the book is, naturally, I was horrified by her doing that, but I had my walking cane with me, so I clubbed her over the head and then pushed her lifeless body into the ditch next to her. And then he goes on. You see, if I was writing that, I'd be cowardly, and I'd maybe have the bravery to do that sort of fabulous flourish, but then I'd say, My next paragraph would say, only kidding.
Only joking,
or
yeah, sure.
joking, of course. But his next paragraph says, I walked on to Bristol.
Yeah. And you know, something else he does, it's fascinating hearing you talk about him, because I just think he's a legend. It is not only can he do it in the same book or the same chapter or the same paragraph, is throughout his oeuvre, can I use that pretentious word, it is he writes books about, you know, travelling around England or Australia and getting drunk in Alice Springs, but he also writes books on Shakespeare and science and the history of the world, and they're equally funny.
That's right.
I've read a book on Shakespeare and laughed my head off, and I know now a little bit more about Shakespeare than I'd ever thought I would.
Well, that's right, and I think he knows, like any good like a good dinner party can have serious bits in it, and it can have uproarious bits in it, and can have silliness, and it can. I mean, I hope that's what I've really tried to do with this book. That I think some readers might say, look, this book does not make sense. It's got too much variety of tone. Some of it is actually quite distressing. When I talk about homophobia in the 60s or 70s, something like that, talk about the way Aboriginal people were treated, it actually makes you cry.
Yeah.
And then there's other parts which are totally silly and stupid about, you know, the food and the fashion. I think that's all right. I think that's what as I say, a good dinner party conversation is like. But other people say that's inconsistency of tone.
Hey, we like inconsistency. Now, I'm going to move you on to In the Ghetto by Elvis Presley. It was one of his comeback classics. What a fabulous lyric. I'm not really a Presley chap, but in your honour, I listened to it 10 times.
It's good, isn't it?
Well, reading it, it's like a good poem. You know, listening to it, he nails it. But tell me your story behind In the Ghetto.
Well, partly I think it's important to say to the world that any genuine Elvis fan likes it all. There's this terrible thing that we Elvis fans put up with, which is people saying, oh, yes, he's fine. I really like the Sun Sessions. Oh, give me a break. You know, they only like the very first record, or if they're really pressed, up until about when he joins the army, you know.
Or pre-white jumpsuit.
Yeah, that's right. And actually the jumpsuit is some of the great material.
Yeah, I mean...
And the career is really interesting all the way through, and the Sun Sessions is fantastic, but also some of the sort of power ballads are. Yeah. So that's the first thing to say. And people, there's a whole theory that the wankers have, which is that Colonel Tom Parker ruined Elvis. And really, that's not a good reading of it, I don't think. I think he wanted all of this, and all these songs are an expression of different parts of Presley and the changing times of Presley. I think the other reason I chose Presley, he's very important to me in the way that I think, you know, my other book that came out before
Flesh Wounds?
Avocado, Flesh Wounds, is really about having inadequate parents and how you rebuild yourself after that. And it's a kind of quite defiant book that uses comedy again to beat reality with a stick and insist that you can move on from inadequate parenting. And I think in practice, one of the ways I moved on from inadequate parenting is just to invest a lot in a hero.
So you project...
You sort of create a father figure for you or a mother figure. And I'm sure that a lot of kids do that, so that it might be a sporting hero, it might be a ballet star, it might be anything. But a lot of what that is doing is kind of finding the love elsewhere in your life, that if you lack it in one place, you kind of find it and you invest in people. Maybe you invest absurd amounts in people.
Sure.
So when I was 12, I invested, I was a card-carrying member of the fan club at 12, which was inappropriate to the
And did he let you down or did he deliver?
He delivered. In fact, I let him down.
Right.
Because this was all right out of kilter. I mean, people weren't really liking Elvis anymore. Not my age. My age was sort of Bowie and all that, but I was still into Elvis. And I had the membership card, and I used to go to school dances and try to attract 15-year-old girls by showing them my membership card. Elvis Presley Fan Club, Todd Slaughter, club president. It was an English club. Australians joined the English club. Yeah. Manchester.
Was the bar for entry high, Richard?
It was not high. It was the payment of £2 in English money or something.
You didn't have to pass an exam of coolness or anything.
No. But as I say, I let him down really because I've loved it. I still love him. And I only momentarily got distracted from my love between when I was about maybe 18 and 21, and it was during that time that he died.
Right.
It was because I didn't pay attention.
It's interesting hearing...
I let him down, not him me.
Do you think you are damaged by your upbringing?
Look, I think that, the book's really a defiant thing about how you're not damaged. But yeah, I suppose I am damaged. But I think the other thing about the book, I suppose, is that it's really about how a vast number of people have troubled childhoods. Maybe not everybody. One of the questions I ask when I talk about it publicly is I say to people, who here felt that they had the love from their parents that they want to give a child of their own? That's a quite challenging question to think about. I'm not saying everyone says no. In fact, I think about 60% of people say, yeah, I did. I kind of did. They're not perfect, but yeah, I kind of did. But that means that 40% didn't. Yeah. And, we have a whole language of parenting as if it's inexorable. We even talk about animals, a cow and a calf, and, as if this is built into the very thrum of our DNA that mothers always love their children, their fathers always. And if you have that rhetoric, the trouble with that rhetoric is then if you miss out on that, you end up feeling terribly aggrieved, as if you're the only person like that, and as if you've got a right to have an unsuccessful life because of it. And you turn that around and think, well, actually, a lot of people don't have it, and yet we're not all drug addicts and robbing service stations. And it's because of this great human resilience, and we manage to find the love elsewhere. We find it in a partner or a child or a work culture we like, or a brother or a sister, or in a white pantsuit.
So the English comedian Jimmy Carr, who he gave a really moving interview.
With his tax accountant.
Well, he is surprisingly, when he's not on stage being him, he's surprisingly thoughtful. And he said something that really stuck with me, which is you get to choose your own narrative. So he could, he had his own hard luck story. So he could say, my narrative could be boo-hoo-hoo, my parents never loved me, I'm dyslexic, blah, blah, blah. Or my narrative could be, I went to Cambridge and I'm a successful comedian. You get to choose.
Yeah, to some extent. I think, obviously in some cases the damage is so extreme that,
yes.
And certainly I'm not saying everybody can overcome this thing, but it is amazing to see how many people do. And certainly, one of the things I really object to in the book is that idea that if you've had inadequate parenting, you cannot go on to be a good parent yourself.
Especially
and I really object to that.
So, but back to your most recent book, the avocado one, it is, I love promoting the notion, at the same time as not saying some people have got awful circumstances that they can't get over, but we should also be celebrating the fact, which I personally, without wanting to blow smoke up your arse, it's an amazing uplifting story where you can choose not to be a victim. You don't let your past define you. It's an important part of your makeup, but it's like sort of realism about the past, but excitement about the future. Not boo-hoo-hoo, I'm condemned. I was sent to boarding school at the age of 5 in another country. Cry me a river. Yes, yeah. Isn't that awful? Well, get over it, Nigel. You're 54. So what? There's probably some good things about it as well as some crap things about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it makes you what you are, doesn't it? And there's pleasure in that. I think both books have got that similarity. One's a more Flesh Wounds is a more personal book, and this is more about us as a country, really. And as a country, we've said, let's get real and let's do things and let's change. And it's important to take pride in that, I think, that there's something almost demeaning to ourselves, to those who, you weren't here for the whole period, but for those who are...
Apologies.
For those of us who actually have lived here all through that period, we've been part of the change that had to happen, and we should take pride in that. And we should also... And acknowledging it is also a way of acknowledging all those important people along the way who helped make it happen, the Ann Summers or the brave men and women of the gay liberation movement of the time, or the Charlie Perkins or the Gough Whitlams, all these people who helped make it happen. You only really measure their achievement if you really sit with what it was like, not through rose-coloured glasses. I mean, there's pleasure in this book, I hope, of some of the nostalgic things you come across, but not looked at through rose-coloured glasses, looked at for real.
This is The 5 of My Life with Richard Glover. More in a moment. This is The 5 of My Life with Nigel Marsh. Now, your place, and I apologise because I'm trying to read everything I could about you and by you, but I didn't get to read the actual book, but I read about it.
Oh, right, I'm leaving. That's it.
It was rubbish, mate. Now, it is the Mud House, which it's going to be next, because I'm really intrigued by the story. And Philip Clark is your mate, is that right?
Yeah. So Philip Clark, who does nightlife on ABC.
Can I just say, hasn't he got the most come-to-bed voice of anyone on radio, including yourself.
By which you mean he sends you to sleep. Well, I'm pleased to know that.
Philip, he's got Kavorka in his voice. He's got a lovely...
He's great on radio. He's also, my sort of best buddy, and we met at university a long time ago, and in the very early years of university, somebody said to somebody, we should buy a block of land and build a place. And I don't know why that was said, and I think actually that is often said actually among Australians, and normally the moment passes. Yeah. And there was this particularly boozy night I remember in Canberra, where in Canberra at the time you could buy port by the 44-litre bladder from wineries outside town, and you'd bottle it yourself. And Phil had bought one of these bladders, and he was bottling this. And this particular night was the only time in my life I've ever been served port in a schooner glass with a head. And maybe that was the reason that by the end of this night we got out the newspaper, we were starting circling ads, and we bought this. In the end, we bought a block of land up near Wombeyan Caves, which is sort of
Goulburn,
Mittagong, Taralga.
How did you afford it? Was it just
It was really cheap. It was $26,000.
Right.
Okay. So it was
between two of you.
Between four of us really, us two and our two girlfriends, and it was it was just the right amount of money that you could max out your bank card and every coin underneath the back seat of the car, and we bought it. And part of the reason I think we made Mud Brick House on it was that by that time we then had no funds, and yet you're keen to do something.
Sure.
So the one thing you can do, which is entirely free, is make mud bricks. You just push up some dirt and you get some moulds and you start making them. And that's what we did. And we made something like 6,000 mud bricks, and we built this Mud Brick House. And that book is the story really of this kind of physical manifestation, I think, of our friendship. And then, of course, the kids came along. It's the physical I see the house as the physical manifestation of Phil and him kind of, if this doesn't sound too pretentious, him kind of teaching me this useful way to be a man. I talked before about the straitjacket of masculinity when I was growing up. But there is a useful way of being a man. And I think and not an aggressive man, not a negative image of masculinity, but a kind of good, useful, building image of masculinity where I could feel happy with myself as an Australian man. And I think the house is a manifestation of that process. And my two great sons coming along and helping with the process, and our two wives, and they're kind of gung ho at it.
And when you mentioned your girlfriend, I hope this is not putting my foot in it. What was the girl?
That's Deborah. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. So she's been there for the whole journey as well.
She's been there for the whole journey.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So we met when we were when she was 20 and I was 21 at ANU. I was always interested in the theatre, and I walked past the ANU, drama theatre, and some student was putting on an amateur production of Joe Wharton's What the Butler Saw, which I adore. Right. So I went in, I opened the door and went in.
So childhood sweethearts.
And I offered to paint her sets. That's not a euphemism.
I think that there's something, it's interesting actually, in all the stuff I read about you, mate, it is quite inspirational and uplifting message in confronting a fear. And I don't mean a fear like a lion or something, but something you can't do. So it could be learning to draw, or it could be learning to make a house, where it's actually amazingly satisfying and enriching, where if you go, I understand I can't do this, but I'm going to own the fact that I can't, and take the time to learn and not go for perfection, but go for progress. Yeah. You go, do you know what? You bloody hell, you inner city radio host have built a house. That's bloody impressive.
Yeah, and from the standing start of a person couldn't lift a hammer really.
But I think there's a lesson in that, which is if you can learn that, think of all the other stuff that other people can learn. It might not be house. It might be, I want to learn Chinese. It's too daunting.
It's all muscle memory, isn't it? I think that is one of the lessons of building a house, actually, is that I really knew nothing. Phil knew a bit, actually, but I really knew nothing. And you kind of understand if you take things slowly and footings. how do you do footings? Okay, let's ask somebody. Let's read a book about it. Okay, you do them this way. How do you set a string line? Okay, you do it. And you can actually do all. You don't do them as well as a tradesperson. Of course you don't.
No.
And you take 5 times the time. And sometimes you have to do them 3 times. We had a great saying in this thing. We'd do these jobs and we'd look back and it'd be, entirely shithouse.
Yeah.
And we'd say, oh, well, it's not meant to be the floor of the Sistine. We'd say the floor of the Sistine Chapel.
So if I drove down the road and when you first see it, is it hilariously rubbish? Does it look like a house about to fall down?
No,
it
looks great. It's a true story. And,
Right.
and since then we've built another.
Oh, you're showing off now, Glover.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, part of the problem was my younger son, who was kind of 15 at this stage. We'd finished the first house when he was about 12, and he kind of came to both of us with this complaint, which is that his older brother had a chance to be part of this, and he kind of didn't, and really this seemed to be terribly unfair. And couldn't we build another one?
I want to build a house with Daddy.
Yeah,
that's so sweet.
And I sort of looked at Phil, and Phil looked at me. And
another one.
There was backs aching, credit cards maxed out, entirely. Finally able to sit on this veranda and drink a beer. And Phil said, "You know what? Of course we should." And it was really Phil who said, "Yeah, the boy wants to do it. We will do it." And we did it. And the sort of most moving thing of all really was once we got a bit of it up, to see, I've still got a really stark memory of this particular day when I was standing on the ground because I'm a bit scared of heights, and Phil and my young son Joe, who was probably 16 or something, 17, were in the superstructure of the house, the roof structure, but without tin, so you could see them, and they were kind of picked out against the horizon. And I could see Phil teaching Joe, how to use tools, how to use electric saws and things, just like he taught me all those years before. And he was kind of teaching my boy to be a man, It was
so the joy.
So it was heartbreaking.
Of shared endeavour towards a common goal. It's an amazing. It's a bit like if you play competitive sport, which I don't do anymore. But you're just doing stuff, right? It's like some of my problems with lovely dinner parties that I'm sure we all go to is you just sit around talking crap. It's more enlightening and fun to do something and talk crap.
I love those moments when you're building, when you don't say anything, actually.
Right.
And you're, I don't know, something like putting up the big rafters in the ceiling. And a lot of it's wordless, and you're kind of looking at each other and you're adjusting, and I can see what he's doing and he can see. And actually you can be wordless for half an hour, and yet you're kind of really closely working together.
You're tuned. Yeah. Wonderful.
It is a good thing. It is a good thing.
Now, your possession, mate, again, which I'm loving hearing people, probably of all the 5 choices, I like getting to this bit the most, because they're yet to have something that is worth a well, it's always stuff.
These were pretty pricey.
Oh, were they?
Can I bring it into... Here we go.
Orthotic. This isn't because you're vain and you want a couple of extra inches of height. Glover has got orthotic boots because you've got a dodgy back, is that right?
No, I've got a dodgy foot, and which I suffered from for a long time. And I was thinking, I would wake up every morning with aching legs after, being asleep. And I was contemplating having one of those operations which would cost $10,000.
Which leg, left or right?
This left leg's the main problem. And I was going to have the expensive operation. And then because I think because my wife's a playwright, we've got some friends who are in the theatre, and one friend said to another friend because I was whinging about my leg, and someone said, "Go and see Jodie." And we actually already vaguely knew Jodie, and Jodie is a boot maker who does the boots for showbiz musicals around the world. I mean, she works from Sydney, but she flies out to the West End and does the boots for Priscilla or whatever, or the
Kinky Boots or something.
Kinky Boots or whatever the big show is. She does the shoes, and just occasionally, I think, just as an act of charity, she also does a few orthotics.
Right.
And so I went in there. This is a long time ago, but you will like this story, I think. I went in there a long time ago, and she fitted me up and measured me up and all that sort of stuff. And then I had to come back a week later. And by that time, she had a whiteboard on with all her current jobs. And at that time in Sydney, there was the Pope was coming out, and they were doing the Stations of the Cross as a sort of thing, and she was doing the shoes for that. And so she had a whiteboard of current jobs, and the jobs were 1, Jesus; 2, Gough Whitlam, because he had problems with it. 3, Richard Glover.
Nice.
And I think Gough and me and Jesus would all take pleasure in that. Gough might object to the order.
But this is lovely. So she actually sorted you out.
Yeah.
And what was it? Do you mind me asking? You got one leg shorter than the other?
No,
or what?
I've got a kind of oh, now this is embarrassing. I talked about the straitjacket of masculinity during school years. I did my best to fight out of it. I took up ballet.
Right.
When I was about 14. And there was a loophole in the school sports register whereby they said boys could do outside sports, outside the school's authority, if there was a sport the school didn't offer. And this was mainly, I think, to allow kids to go yachting on Lake Burley Griffin.
Not to do ballet, you effeminate embarrassment.
Not to do ballet, you effeminate embarrassment. So anyway, I signed up to ballet, but I was really terrible at it. I still remember the ballet, the lady who was taking the class, sort of me and 15 girls, total Billy Elliot, and her saying, Richard, would you mind seeing if you can go to gym and work on your arm muscles so you could at least lift any one of the girls a few inches off the floor would be helpful. But I think in the course of doing that, at some point, I tried to do a sort of plie, or can't even remember the terms now.
So it was an injury. It's not.
You know how people talk about an old war injury?
Yeah.
It's an old ballet injury.
It wasn't when I was playing the All Blacks. It was when you were doing...
When I was doing Swan Lake. I sort of cracked the big bone, sort of toe muscle, I don't know what it's called, the joint in my big toe. And so it's sort of over the years, it's sort of calcified. But with Jodie's help, it's fine.
Now, you look
Jodie.
quite a well-preserved, what are you, 35? You look quite well-preserved 35.
I'm just next week publishing my new book, which is called Sexy, Sophisticated and 60.
That's my title.
No, I think
No,
you got the 40 and 50.
No,
you got the 40 and 50 sorted, but I don't think you've copyrighted the 60 yet.
Well, I'm going to it after the show.
No, but I've got there first.
So, 2 questions for you. One, is it true that you use one of those standing desk things?
Yeah, the ABC. Yeah,
and good.
Yeah.
You recommend it?
I think that's quite good. Yeah, so you can put them down if you want, but cool. I think. I feel better for it, and I think people, I think the guests respond to it. You feel slightly more that you're on a stage. And,
sure, cool.
And you're here on the radio for 10 minutes, for 15 minutes. Come, speak, deliver.
Yeah.
Get on with it.
I like it. And the second one is, I think we share a love of the English journalist Matthew Parris.
Yes.
Wow.
Matt. Yeah.
Wow. Now,
he's the greatest writer.
Oh, he's just sensational. In 2006... he wrote about him not washing his hair, and I therefore stopped washing my hair. And then someone told me that you did the same. And I want to chronologically date it, because your hair looks all right, like mine looks all right.
But I think this is the weirdest friendship. We are quite good friends.
You know him?
Yeah, we're quite good friends.
Ah, wow. I'm jealous.
But I know him because of this. So he writes this column in the Times about not washing his hair.
And the Spectator. That's where I mean.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, gee, that's a great radio stunt. Because I could do this in Sydney, I could not wash my own hair, and then I could recruit listeners, because Paris puts this theory that if you don't wash it for 6 weeks, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. But if you stick with it,
you break through. That's right.
So
I remember
it's a great Protestant work ethic or whatever thing. You finally break through, and you enter this sunny uplands where you never have to wash your hair again. That's the theory. So I thought, what a great radio stunt! I can recruit people, so I do this.
Well, what year is this?
Oh, it's a long time ago now. Yeah. I can't remember. A decade ago or something.
Yeah,
cool. Maybe 12 years ago. I can't remember. I get 600 people in Sydney.
Wow.
And we're doing it quite formally. We've all got diaries and we're filling it in. And of course, then I get, I admit it's Matthew's idea, of course. So we get Matthew on all the time during this process on the phone from England to be our guru, I suppose. Right. And anyway, we do this, and about 80% of the people end up saying their hair is better, the same
That's
or
what
better,
happened to me. Yep.
Despite not using. And a lot of people are still doing it. I meet people all the time who are saying, "I'm still doing it, mate. Think of all the money I've saved in the." But Matthew then comes out to Australia, so we have him on the radio again, and I tell him about the Mud House book. So this is a slightly weird, long story, but I tell him about the Mud House book because by then I've published this book about the Mud House. And it's really based on a book that Matthew wrote. And he wrote this great book about this house in Spain that he and his sister had a sort of 14th century house that he and his sister had rebuilt. And I was inspired by this book because I thought my story with the house is the same, using the fabric of the building as an expression of a relationship. So I wrote my book, and I said to Matthew, not only have you inspired this hair thing, but you've inspired this book, which was, just published a year ago, and, all of that. And I said, one thing I should tell you actually is it sold very poorly. And Matthew said, really? So did mine. I thought, mate, you could have told me.
Oh, I love it. Now, listen, there's one last, this should be the 6 of my life, not the 5 of my life. Mm-hmm. There's one last question. It is, who would you like to hear on 5 of my life next? So we just had Kevin Rudd and John Eales, and your dear self, and you're driving in your car to Mittagong to your mud house. Who would you want to listen to on 5 of my life?
I think everyone has suddenly realised really quite recently was that when we talk about the great prime ministers of the recent period, we talk about Hawke, Keating and Howard, I think. A lot, I know there's a variety of tensions about all that, but I think a lot of people agree they were all 3 pretty good prime ministers. I think people are realising that Gillard was actually quite a good prime minister.
You know what? How?
And that's a recent realisation. Recent realisation.
Richard Glover, you have been just sensationally interesting to listen to, and I really appreciate you coming on my 5 of my life, and I'm going to give Julia a ring this afternoon.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
The 5 of my life was presented by me, Nigel Marsh. Producer, Alex Mitchell. Sound production and theme music by Darcy Thompson and Matt Nicholish.